All right, welcome everybody. Looks like we are live. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artist Network. So we meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. So this is what we're working on today. This is an awesome photo of this toucan that I found. Pretty awesome bird. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun drawing this today. I am kind of struggling to find any kind of really kind of key element to focus on in this. I think this is really just a straightforward, let's have fun drawing this bird session. So we'll talk through some of the processes with regards to controlling proportions, getting the values right, but really just, I think we're just going to have fun drawing this thing today. So if you are following along, you can find the reference image in the description below. And so you can find that, or you can draw along with me with this version here. We're working vertically today, which is fairly unique. We don't work vertically a whole lot, but it allows us to put the reference image side by side with the drawing. So it might work for you to do that as well here. So welcome everybody. I love seeing all the familiar names here. A lot of great drawings posted last week. So that we drew Yosemite, so landscape. So a nice challenge there. Switching gears up today. Working today, the paper, I've been exploring a variety of papers that Legion provides. In this case, this is the Coventry rag. So it's a 100% cotton rag paper, similar to the Rives BFK. I believe we worked with, was it Somerset last week, I believe. So just different versions of a cotton rag paper. So this is the Coventry, and I love this one. It's a fairly smooth surface, but it's got enough tooth that it's going to hold the charcoal really well. All right, now I've got my erasers up here first. So this is what I have for my erasers. I've got my trusty Kneaded eraser. Let me bring that into the shot here. I've got my Derwent retractable eraser. So this is just a rubber eraser. And then I'm going to have this Tombow Mono Zero eraser for some of the finer details. Otherwise, let's see, for the charcoal, I just got a 2B and a 4B today. Charcoal pencil. There's not a huge range of values here, so I mean, if you can see how dark the bird gets. One of the challenges here is actually trying to see some of the subtle variations in those darks, so we may kind of manipulate that a little bit so it doesn't feel like it's just this large black blob. So I've got the 2B and the 4B today, but I think a 6B will work just great. I've got my Vine charcoal and a couple of blending stumps. So I've got this old one that I've been using for quite a while, and I've got this new fine one for some of those details, because I kind of feel like getting into some of those details today, see what I can do with the charcoal. If you have graphite, I think this is going to work really well with graphite, and that's going to really allow you to get into those details, especially around the eye. So if you have any questions, type them out in all caps there in the chat. I have it set up on my left here, so when I'm looking that way, that's what I'm looking at. I have this overhead camera so I'm looking ahead and I can see what's being projected overhead. So I think it's going to be really helpful for you today to make sure you can set your work up vertically as we go along. So let's see. I see some questions here. Oh, Katie finally got the oil paint off the carpet. Way to go! I would have given up long ago, so nicely done. I would have just tore it all up and put a new one or something. Let's see. Ivan has a question. What kind of angle pencil do you use? Let's see. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I often get questions about how I sharpen the pencil, so I simply use a razor blade. Where is my razor blade? Here it is. So I just simply use a razor blade and I carve it down. Now in this case, I'm getting some of that dust on the paper, so it's making a little bit of a mess. But that's what I'm doing, and I'm intentionally doing that to expose more of the core, so I can get in and use the side of the pencil a little bit more, rather than using the tip of the pencil. So while I'm doing this, I might as well just build up some of that charcoal kind of powder. Because with this one, what's kind of nice is just kind of playing around with some values in the background. There's a lot happening in the reference photo that I'm just going to kind of ignore. So I'm going to manipulate the background to best support the image, hopefully. So we'll just see what happens. In my experience with this paper earlier was that I could erase pretty well down to the nice white. So I'm anticipating that's going to happen this time, but we'll see. Katie almost did give up on your your carpet there. So, well, I'm glad you stuck with it. So, paper towel here. I forgot that's one of my kind of key tools. I use that a lot here, but let's see what happens. I didn't do this in the preparatory sketch. Just kind of tone the page. It lifts pretty well, but not great. I guess with that, I guess I can burn that in there. With a rubber eraser, it really starts to lift pretty well. So I think we'll be in good shape with that. So I'm just making a mess right now. Hopefully, it's not something I can't recover from. But that's why we're kind of experimenting. This is all about having fun with drawing, taking risks, not about being perfect artists. And I may have just kind of done something foolish here, but let's see what happens. All right. Let's see. Cynthia has a question. Wow, isn't this about our 100th class? This is episode 97. So 100 is going to be at the end of this month, so hopefully we'll do something fun for that. I can't believe we've had that many episodes. It's been awesome. All right, so as you know, for those of you who have been drawing with me for a while, know kind of the general flow that I go with is to establish a gesture first. So simply get information on the page, and from this, we will kind of adjust the proportions accordingly. So with your initial gesture, it's just about reacting to the subject, you know, putting as much thought into it as you want. I tend to not to think too much about it, but every time I glance down at the paper, there is a quick kind of check-in to see where I am on the page. I don't like how it's sitting in the window of the camera, so I'm going to move things down a little bit. So one of the things that a gesture does is it's not only kind of gets you started with the drawing, but it also helps you to just kind of make sure everything fits properly. So I'm observing that when I frame this up in the camera, there's some cropping happening. I don't want to lose that beak. So I'm going to move everything over. I'm going to see if I can, it's kind of weird. So I'm kind of drawing for the camera right now. And so it's going to make everything on this paper look a little weird because I'm cropping off so much of the left here. So I mean the right side of the drawing. So right now it's all about kind of embracing the messiness of drawing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to give myself an indicator and put a little mark here that's just behind the reference photo to make sure that I fit everything properly. So we're going a little abstract to begin with. And then out of this, we'll see if we can kind of extract some sense of realism. So right now, I'm intentionally leaving some of those early marks on the page because I want to see how I'm moving around. Like I said, I'm having to frame things up for the camera's sake a bit more than this actual paper. This is about a 9x11 sheet of paper that I'm working on. In case you're wondering about the size. And I want to tone this ground here. So one thing, you know, if you're working on a paper that doesn't release the charcoal too much when you're erasing, one strategy is to essentially key everything down in terms of value. So we may end up doing that. I suspect, you know, like I said, when I worked on this paper earlier, it did a great job erasing. So, but if you're worried about your paper not erasing back down, that's all right. You just like I said, just key everything down so that, you know, your brightest brights aren't necessarily the white of the page anymore. And if we look at this photo, if we were to translate the values 1 to 1, even the brightest area in the yellow part you know, along the breast there is not going to be a pure white. So I'm not really all that concerned with preserving a pure white. So now that I've created a few kind of initial versions of the gesture, I'm going to try to lock that in. What I'm setting as kind of an anchor point for me is that black stripe at the base of the beak right next to the eye. So the eye in that black stripe. And I'm placing that where I think I need it to be in order for everything to fit properly. And by toning the ground, I can start to think through some fundamental value relationships. So, you know, this part of the beak here being darker than that background. As we come across here, there's a light stripe across the top that's going to be lighter than that background. Here we have the darker feathers, and I'm going to see if I need to lighten up that background to create some contrast there. All right, hello everybody. I see some questions, so I just want to address some of these here. Ivan V, what is the softness of the pencils? This right now is just a vine charcoal that I'm working with, but the other two charcoal pencils, I have a 2B and a 4B, so that's a fairly hard and then a medium weight. So depending on the brand of charcoal pencil that you're working with, if it lists it as with an alphanumeric code, then we want to look for a 2B or a 4B or or a 6B. I think those would all work. Or if without that, it's either I tend to work in the medium and the hard for this one. But you might, like I said, I think you'll do just well with the with a soft one. Hello from the Netherlands. Welcome everybody. Steamy Vermont, 96 degrees in Vermont. Holy smokes. It's Colorado heat. We got that temperature today. I don't know anybody else from Colorado. We had that tornado pass by close by. That was crazy the other day. Very little damage, which was nice, but it was wild to see a tornado so close to the house there. So, all right. So I'm trying to think in terms of just basic mass rather than line. You know, I have some line work indicating the forms, but I'm trying to see it as mass instead of line. And there's going to be, I can definitely see right off the bat, there's going to be quite a bit of adjustment, but I need to be a little bit clearer with the form before I can make declarative statements about the proportions. I'm not ready to make specific adjustments to the proportions yet. But I need to be able to see the bird, and then from here, adjust the height. So for example, this looks too tall compared to that, to the width of the beak. All right, thank you, everybody. I see a lot of new names here, so welcome. If you are new, I want to welcome you. You can see all the past episodes. Like I said, this is all about just getting together to draw together, share ideas and insights. If you see anything that I'm doing that you have questions about or concerns, if you say, hey, that looks awful, let me know. All right, just in a kind way, hopefully. But, you all have helped me through some really nice, tricky spots in my work in the past, and that's why we're drawing together, is for you to share your insights. If you're following along and you're stuck on anything, help me understand where you're at, and then we can all try to help you through it. And then you'll find in the description, as well as pinned to the top of the chat, a link to the show page on Artist Network where you can share your work. And again, I've seen some really fantastic work, some wonderful progress from many of you. And what's really encouraging is when you share your work that didn't go so well, and that's very brave of you all, and I appreciate that. So there's a question: do I like Koh-i-Noor pencils? I don't use them a whole lot, but I do know that when I did use them, I did enjoy them quite a bit. These are General's pencils that I'm working with right now. Yeah, that's what I have. I also like Derwent. So this is kind of handy, having the reference image right next to my drawing, so that what you're seeing is what I'm seeing when I look up. And so I'm starting to make some adjustments based on that, and it can be helpful if you set up your drawing studio in the same way, to have your reference image right next to your drawing, preferably vertically. If you can set it up on an easel, that's typically the best. And just kind of move your eyes back and forth and get comfortable working indirectly. So when I'm making my marks here, I'm putting my awareness on the reference image. And then when I'm looking at the reference image, I'm also kind of paying attention to the movement I'm catching out of my periphery on the drawing. So you're kind of doing both at the same time. So sometimes you're looking focusedly at the drawing, sometimes at the reference image, but often you're kind of looking offset, studying the reference but putting some awareness on the drawing, and then vice versa. So one of the things that becomes apparent, especially when you start looking at it vertically, is I could see, for example, that the angle of this branch was a bit off. When I look at it from this angle, it looks correct, right? But I look at it vertically and you realize that it's off. So those are some of the distortions that can happen if you're not careful, if you don't kind of reorient yourself to the work. And as we've talked about in this series before, you want to step back from it, flip it upside down, take a photo and look at the thumbnail. Try to change the context of the work as much as possible, so that you see the work with fresh eyes, and don't get kind of caught in a kind of cognitive loop where you miss certain elements repeatedly, because that's typically what happens. I'll make a mistake, my brain will say, hey, that looks right, and then just accepts it without ever really analyzing it again. So you have to do some kind of cognitive tricks in order to perceive your work more objectively. And that's true with whether you're working from life or not. If you're working from imagination, that same thing happens. So we're slowly kind of adjusting the proportions, and we can kind of talk through some of the processes that I go through. And for those of you who have been with me for a while, you know all of this stuff probably by heart now. But there are a few tools that you can use to correct the proportions. There's, one of the things that I probably go to the most is angle sighting. And so what you're looking at there is you're breaking down the form into simple angles and then comparing the reference photo to the drawing. So in this case, you might look at the angle of the beak, and you can hold your pencil up, close one eye, hold your pencil up over the reference image, and then carry it across on top of your drawing to compare the angle. So you lock your wrist to make sure it's not tilting or anything, and you compare it left to right. So I typically go through that first, kind of then making a value judgment just based on initial impressions about the proportions. Then the next step would be comparative measuring. So you're using a very similar approach there, but in this case you're comparing the dimensions of one element of the image to another element. So in this case, if we were to use the width of the beak as our basic unit of measurement, we can compare that to then the height of the bird, maybe even the height of the beak. How much wider is it than tall? So we get the correct dimension of the beak itself, as well as the correct relationship between the width of the beak and the bird. So in this case, actually, I have a larger reference image right here. So I'm going to take my charcoal here, and I'm closing one eye and hovering over the reference, and I'm aligning this end of the charcoal with this point in the reference photo, then sliding this finger down the length of the charcoal until it aligns with the tip of the beak, and that gives me a unit. And if you extend your arm fully, that allows you to keep the distance between you and the charcoal consistent, and it keeps then that measurement consistent. So then I can take that measurement and I can turn it, and I can compare it to this distance here. And I can see just how much longer this is compared to the width of the beak. So if I take this distance and I measure down here, it puts me at this part of the bird, just above the feet a bit. And I want to compare that to if I compare that to the drawing, it looks like I'm actually in pretty decent shape. So I have a basic dimension there that works. So the width here to here, it looks all right. And then I'm actually going to compare that to the width, the height of the bird itself. What's again a cool dimension here is that this dimension here, the width of the beak, is the same as the height from the top of the bird to the base of that yellow where the black begins here. So this distance here is the same as that. And so that actually aligned pretty well. And now I'm going to continue to do that again. And if I take this dimension and I measure down, and then down again, it should put me about in the middle of the wood. And so you can see here that that it's not actually, if I were to take this dimension, carry it down twice, I'm almost at the base of the wood. So it actually means the bottom of the wood should actually be somewhere down here. And that means that the tail feathers are actually going to run off the bottom unless I adjust the scale. So what do I want to do? You know, I think I'm early enough on in the drawing that I can start to adjust things accordingly. So maybe what I'll need to do is actually shrink everything in just a bit. So, gosh, I really like this paper. It's got a really nice tooth to it. It's smooth, but not like slick or glossy. Love it. So if I bring this in, if I say I lock this point here, that black band at the base of the beak, but I bring the tip of the beak in, I'm going to have to adjust the height, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm mostly concerned with this basic proportion. So I can take that and measure down here, and that means that this part would come up. So we're doing a bit more adjustment than we typically do. But I'm going to stick with it for a bit more. Kind of stay in this early gesture drawing. That brings that up. So again, taking this dimension from the top of the head to the base of that yellow is the same as the width of the beak. And then I can carry that down, and that should put me right in the middle of that branch. And then below that, I can extend the feathers. And so now everything's going to fit a little bit better. So now we've kind of established those basic dimensions, but let's compare the height of the beak to the width of the beak and see how that ends up. Because I don't want it to be like this skinny thing kind of projecting out the head. I don't want it to be a big bulky thing. So much of what defines this bird is the scale of that beak compared to the rest of the body, as well as its unique shape. So if I take the height here, so I'm aligning this with the top of the charcoal with the top part of the highest point of the beak, sliding my finger down until it aligns with the bottom part of the beak to get this dimension here. And then I'm simply going to turn it. 1, 2. And based on what I'm seeing, it's approximately twice as wide as it is tall. So I can take this, and if I turn it, you get 1, 2. So we have actually a basic, we're pretty close to getting the proportions right here. I want to just kind of clarify that a little bit. Now, focusing on the proportions, there's still kind of individual characteristics about the beak, the unique shape of the beak that we haven't captured yet. So I'm not concerned with that yet. It's going to take a little bit more time to process that information. And so we're starting with the bigger information right now. And then we're going to gradually become more specific with our observations. So I'm just doing some negative drawing there to refine some of the shapes, thinking about basic angles. And so now I know if I have those major proportions defined, I can start to play within each of these areas a little bit more freely, and I can really focus on some of those details without worrying that it's going to throw off the larger proportions. Now you can see I really haven't dealt with the eye yet, and I'm doing that on purpose because I messed that up so much. It's one of those things where you look at the eye, it's so kind of important, it takes up a larger part of our consciousness, so we tend to draw it larger than it actually is, or at least that's what I do. And so I need to get everything else established first, and then draw the eye. And once the context of the bird has been established, when I place the eye, it'll be very apparent if I've drawn it too large or too small. Early on, without that bird being resolved, I may not be able to see as immediately what's wrong with the scale of the eye. So that's kind of my thinking there. It's really kind of bizarre because I'm looking here and everything looks squished. But when I look on the camera, it's all stretched out. So again, got to step back. Cindy Bates has a question. What's the name of the paper? So that's written in the description as well, so you can see specifically the weight of the paper. But this is a Coventry rag that was provided by Legion Paper. Ivan V., how do you feel about the Russian school of drawing? An academic style of drawing in Europe? That's a great question. I think that academic drawing is good, and I apply a lot of those principles as well. And I don't know enough about the particular qualities of the Russian school specifically to talk intelligently about it. So I'm not gonna I'm not gonna say something foolish about it. But in general, what I love about the time we're in right now is that we have the opportunity to explore a variety of options. And for me, I like to kind of pick and choose from a variety of different things. I really like the tools that are expressed through academic drawing and more of a classical approach. But I also appreciate the way those have been challenged throughout art history, and the importance of expression and abstraction in work. And so that's generally where I'm at with it. To me, drawing in particular has such a deep and tight relationship to our own brain, the way we process information, that generally my goal is to try to encourage people to connect with that more deeply. And that it's going to look differently for everybody. So for some of you, you may really enjoy more formal systems. Others may really enjoy more abstract and expressive modes of drawing. But to me, again, the power of drawing is the fact that each mark that we have starts as a thought, and we're capturing thoughts on paper, and seeing the variety of thoughts that when we observe everybody's work. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so I'm feeling a little better about the basic proportions here. I shouldn't be using my fingers right now. It's going to get oils on the paper. I don't know what I'm doing. I've talked about that before. Oh yeah, and then Sue said the breast needs to be lower. Yes, definitely. I was just looking at that too, and I need to look at that relationship again. So this relationship, because when I compare the width of I guess it does need to come a little bit lower. So this distance here is a little bit greater than the width of the beak in the reference. So a kind of an incomplete measurement that I had before. But I was, thank you for sharing that, because that's exactly where I was observing some issues as well. And this is where I need to start to become a bit more specific with the forms now, so that I can really dial it in. So I've got my rubber eraser here, and I'm kind of doing some negative drawing. I'm treating that yellow section there kind of as a positive space. I'm actually subtracting, but it's trying to refine that form. This is where sometimes working with line too much can affect the overall proportions, because especially if like this line in here is getting a bit heavy, so then it's affecting how I'm interpreting the proportions of that breast there. So now I'm just kind of slowing things down just a little bit, kind of cutting into the beak. One of the things that I struggled with in the preparatory drawing is getting that angle of the beak right, so I'm kind of learning from that a little bit. And one of the things that might help you is to kind of break up that path. Rather than seeing it as one smooth stroke from left to right or right to left, I'm going to kind of give myself kind of indications across the whole beak, and then try to stitch them together in a constellation of sorts. And this is where right now, looking at the screen, I'm putting my attention, I'm focusing on the curve in here, but actually what I'm thinking about and observing is the motion of my left eye on the camera there. And there's a bit of a delay, which is a little awkward. But I'm just doing kind of some negative drawing here, lifting out really that negative space more than anything. And I'm going to drop that tone back down a little bit later. This is where I can pick up the charcoal pencil. And there are some unique qualities, this kind of delicate, kind of graceful line there, going from a concave to a convex curve along that bottom edge that I want to capture. But in order to do that, I need to get that basic angle correct first. And hopefully all of you have seen by Sue's comment, it's one of the things that we're looking for in this show are some of those observations. So if you see something that's off that I'm not addressing, feel free to call it out. And it's maybe something that I have in the back of my head that I'll address later. It may not be, but don't hesitate to just point things out. And then you might find it helpful to break the curves down as a sequence of short straight marks rather than one smooth curve. And in that way, you can really lock into the specific quality and shape of that beak, rather than it become kind of a generic kind of curve. So there's something happening in here that I'm not ready to thoroughly define yet. So I'm gonna build that up. Now, generally, my other kind of approach to the drawing, which isn't particularly unique, but is to think about general forms gradually getting more specific, and the same with the edges. So edges might be kind of soft in early stages of the drawing, and then we're going to gradually sharpen them up. So as I look at this edge along here, for example, recognizing that I really only have a general understanding of that edge and I don't want to create a specific mark when my understanding of it is general. So I'm going to make general marks that align with my general understanding, and then as I study it more and I understand that form more specifically, allow the drawing to become more specific and precise. So Diane, the length of the beak should end at about his neck. Let's see. I'm not quite sure I get that, but so if you could clarify that, I don't know if I fixed the proportion of the beak to that yet, and I feel like this distance here might need to be adjusted. But I'm going to come in now with my 2B pencil and make some of these that fairly temporary vine charcoal marks a bit more permanent. And I really like the way vine charcoal prepares the surface for compressed charcoal. Sometimes when you go directly onto a paper, no matter what paper it is, it can be a bit jarring for the eye, and then influence our mark making from that. And so I just like a kind of a more gentle approach of starting with the vine charcoal. And then the compressed charcoal seems to kind of float on the surface a bit more. So I'm going to become a bit more precise now with the shape of the head here. So this line, so breaking it down into a sequence of marks, and recognizing that the left and the right sides are asymmetrical. So I don't want it to be a black stripe. So I'm looking at trying to identify really the specific form there. And I think I need to play this both positively and subtractively. Okay, now I mentioned earlier there's like three main tools for correcting proportion, and I got through 2 of them and I totally forgot the other to mention the other one. But I'm using that now. So the final thing that can be really helpful is to pay attention to plumb lines and horizontal guides. So what a plumb line is really just a vertical line that passes through your drawing. So if you think about the technique in which you would place a grid on your reference photo and then transfer that grid to your drawing, it's a kind of a similar approach to that, but you're creating a grid work that's specific to the dimensions of your subject. So in this case, if you were to take a vertical line, I'm holding my pencil up right over the reference image, and I align it with the right side of the bird, I can see where it passes through the various elements and features of the beak, and I can also see the shape of that negative space that's formed by that line. And in that way, you can become aware of the specific forms in a new way. So plumb lines are really helpful tools to better understand the unique forms of your subject. And then horizontal guides are very similar to plumb lines. They're just horizontal. So if I were to take a horizontal line and align it with the beak, for example, it will create a very specific shape in there, that negative space in there, that you can then compare to your reference image. You can also see where that tip of the beak intersects with the lower part of the head there. And in that way, I can identify that something seems a little bit off here that I'll need to adjust. So I'm not sure I have the answer for that yet. about what needs to change, whether the tip of the beak needs to come down or this part of the beak needs to come up. But something seems incomplete there, so I'm kind of putting a mental pin on that to come back around for that. And then Sue is saying it might help to shorten the body by raising the branch. Yeah, I think I might end up having to do that. And so I'm kind of essentially locking this down and then adjusting as we go. So we're kind of in the general ballpark with regards to the proportions, and now we're gonna really kind of dial it in. So I'm gonna keep that in mind. Thank you for that. And so this is nearly sight size. I almost have a one-to-one relationship between the drawing and the reference photo here on the screen. What I'm going to do though, what I think I need to establish is more of that, what I'm observing with the plumb lines. So if I look at this shape here, something seems a little bit off. So I think I need to bring this in just a touch. And again, this is where I'm really grateful that I can see the overhead projection, that same view that you're watching, because it looks so different than what I'm seeing when I look down at the paper. And I'm kind of blending in that background because there was that dark spot was kind of distracting, and I need it to read visually as background, not as a strong positive space. And so if you're new, again, it's all about us just kind of talking about drawing, enjoying drawing together, thinking through some ideas, and just recognizing that there can be benefit in practicing. And sometimes we neglect that part of our artistic practice. So it can be helpful to be accountable, hold ourselves accountable to other people by getting together to draw. I think, here we go. Yeah, I think this needs to come out a little bit more. So yeah, I'm getting a little precise in here, perhaps a bit too early, but I feel like it's going to help me then adjust the rest of the drawing if I kind of set this part as an anchor. So there's this kind of mindset of kind of going back and forth, cutting in and pushing back, like you're moving that edge around. I found for myself that when I draw by kind of creating an outline or a contour line first and then filling in, I never get that contour line right. So, because it just takes time to really understand the specific proportions of the subject. And so this process, again, it's nothing all that unique, but this process that was kind of taught to me is one that is intentionally flexible and parallels the evolution of my understanding of the subject. So just kind of switching back and forth between positive and negative space to start to suggest that right side. All right, so now I think I want to start to kind of lock in that tree branch. I can right away, I can see the angles a little off, but I want to dial in the height, as Sue was suggesting earlier. And then Sue was saying, yeah, the tip of the beak needs more curve downward. Yeah, so right in here, I think as we do that. So I'm going to kind of put a mental note in there about that. Black vertical line, Adele is saying, black vertical line near the eye needs to move over and lengthen the beak. Oh, this one right here. Okay. I'm gonna thank you for that, Adele. I'm gonna put a pin in that as well. Again, when I talk about that, what's happening is that you might find this helpful, but for me, there's some things that are just immediately apparent. I need to move this here or make this bigger, right? And I just know the answer. And then there are a lot of times, especially as we start to dial it in, when we can see something is off, but we can't quite identify what needs to happen. And there is an element that feels like it's some sort of optical illusion. And it's similar to like if you're tuning a guitar by ear. I don't know if anybody's done that. I'm not very good at it. But there's this point when you're tuning a guitar and you're dialing in that tone for a particular string, and you're comparing it to the root note. So whether you're comparing it to the tone of another string or to an audible tuner. So if you're hearing the sound and you're trying to make that string match that sound, there's a point at which if they're very far apart, it becomes easy to identify whether your string is too low or too high in tone. As you get closer, it gets really hard to tell. Right? And I feel like that happens with drawing as well. And so with this, I do agree, something seems off with this, but I don't quite know what. Like maybe it's too thin, maybe it's too tall, maybe it needs to be moved left or right. And so when I say I'm putting a pin in it, it means I need a little bit more information. I need to stew on it a little bit more. I'm going to come back and fix it. So keep throwing out those observations. So I really like those, and I appreciate anybody who's doing that. And because it just gives me more pins to put in there. Because what can really happen is you want to get to the point of finish sometimes a little bit too quickly, and I do this a lot, and I kind of conveniently ignore things that actually need to be fixed. And so again, that's one of the benefits to drawing together is we kind of hold each other accountable. So again, for anybody who's watching and is not used to that, that's part of what makes this show what it is. And here's something an immediate observation that came to mind is this shape along in here that I can adjust. So got a little distracted there. I was working down in here, but I think it was helpful. So as I feel like this is starting to lock together, now I need to establish this height here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take that height and I'm going to compare it to other features in the drawing, actually. So I'm going to take this height, kind of the inside edge from the tree to that black line there, the base between the yellow and the black there. I'm going to take that measurement. Oh, interesting. So that becomes a perfect square. So this height here is equivalent to the width here. So that's an interesting thing. I'm gonna, right now that kind of works. And I take that height and compare it. This height here should bring me at that's just about right. So it feels like we are actually in pretty decent shape. I am, right now as I'm erasing this line, this feels really wrong. But then I look up and I'm like, no, actually that is right. That's how I love that when that happens. Anybody else love optical illusions? Our brains just are always doing crazy things and interpreting things in interesting ways. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to take, what is this dimension? So this height here is almost identical to the height of that wood. The wood is actually a little bit wider, and so you can see on my drawing that I've made it too narrow. So that branch is too skinny. So that means that we're going to probably run off the page. Let's see. So if I'm happy with that, I need to drop that branch down here. And I'm just making general statements about the branch. So I'm going to make that a bit more specific in a little bit. I really enjoy the overhand grip. So if anybody's new, that overhand grip is, I'm just holding it like this. So basically you just put your pencil on the table, pick it up with your fingertips, and you're in that grip. And that allows me to engage with the side of the pencil, and it keeps that tip sharp. So when I need it for details later, it's going to be there. Now there's this dip in that branch. And when I'm observing it in the reference image, I'm doing a quick check-in, a quick kind of mental plumb line to see where it is relative to the rest of the bird. And it's really directly below that right side. And so now I need to establish that tail. And so this is where a plumb line can become really handy. So there's this intersection point between that tail and that branch. So I'm going to use a plumb line here to see where it relates to the rest of the bird. So it should be directly below about this section of that breast. Oh, that's pretty much it. Felt like it was wrong. And now I can do the same. I can do a plumb line up from the right side. And the right side of the feather should be just, or the right side of the tail, left side of the tail. Get my left and right mixed up. Left side of the tail should be aligned with just to the left of this side. So if I lock this down, and I can drop this here and kind of just, I'm going to estimate the height of it. And I'll need to adjust a little bit, but all right. Now that shape is not quite as specific as it needs to be, but I don't want to get bogged down on that part yet. You know, I think in this case we'll probably bring a little bit more focus in here to draw the eye up to that, to the eye. All right. Gene, is the beak connected too far back on the head? It does feel that way. And that's where I think, and like I said earlier, I put a pin in it. I think that's a really good way to put it because it gets me to understand that something seemed wrong here. And so now the question is this off or is this off? But I'm looking at that relationship between them. And that's what's establishing that connection point. Yeah, I gotta think through that. Thank you for sometimes, yeah, just kind of putting an observation in a different way gets you to really kind of think about it. That's what makes drawing classes, you know, so valuable. Oh, that's right. Yes, if you do type in all caps, it helps me to see it. I'm just reading through that. Sorry. Sometimes it feels like I'm just droning out, but I'm actually reading this stuff. So, Mad Mom Must Go, making music's your other hobby. That's awesome. Yeah, and hopefully everybody, it gets difficult, I know, when we're interpreting tone, and especially when we're typing in all caps, it feels like everybody's just yelling. So I get it. And so again, if you're kind of new, it's all good. We're requesting that everybody type in all caps just so I can see it a bit more. And even if you are shouting at me, it's all good. All right. Carmen is asking, do you think you need to either lengthen the beak or shorten the breast? Yeah, something needs to happen now. So let me think. I feel like we're slowly refining it. I don't want to go any lower here. So now what we may have to do is actually kind of work backwards up a little bit. Because I want to avoid kind of lengthening down anymore. I do feel like the beak needs to be a bit longer, just based on my initial, the feeling of it. Somehow I feel like it got too short. So what's so nice about the charcoal is I can just simply do this, just using the palm of my hand, and that beak is now gone. So now come back to it again. This is kind of the part of drawing that it can sometimes be a little uncomfortable, is just doing something over and over and over again. And now I think what I want to do is kind of dial in this curve in here, and rather than start at the tip of the beak and work my way back, I'm going to set this as an anchor. I feel like I have enough room here, and some of the paper is being cropped off, so if I need to If I need to show a bit more of the drawing on the right side, I can do that. I'm trying to do it without having to reframe things in the shot. But so what, kind of getting to this point here, this is what so many of you have kind of talked about before, is this relationship. Let's see. Yeah, I think this part here, this black line, can come across. So I'm gonna. This was a nice wedge, but you can see that I kind of been filing it down along the wrong point. So now the tip is right in the middle of that eraser, and it makes it really hard to be precise. So now I've kind of cut it at this angle so I can really see the tip of the pencil, the tip of the eraser there. All right, so again, doing some positive and negative drawing. And I'm kind of staring up. This is when I'm looking up at you, I'm looking at my drawing vertically and making evaluations there. And then I'm going to refine back in here. So I'm going to use the side of the pencil. And if I align the direction of my marks with the general grain of the feathers along the head, it's going to serve me later in terms of capturing the texture. So I'm starting to think about that, just utilizing the direction of the mark, so at least in a way that will hopefully, again, serve me later. Just kind of cutting into, I don't know what that was all. Sometimes I just make a mark that makes no sense. It happens. So I'm just kind of refining this edge here. A little bit difficult, kind of locking into it. For some reason with that background, I feel it's a little distracting. And again, at some point, I'm just going to have to make a statement about a visual statement in my drawing about the proportions and how accurate I need them to be. And everybody, we're each going to have our own kind of association with that. You may feel like it needs to be 100% accurate. You may feel comfortable being just 90%. Or or less. Maybe it's about being more expressive and kind of impressionistic with your approach. So I'm just kind of refining this edge along in here. And I'm feeling pretty confident with it now. I'm going to soften this because that falls into shadow. What I love about charcoal is the ability to just move it around. You can do that with other media as well, but especially with this paper, I love how it's pushing it around. All right, so does this feel better for everybody? This relationship right in here. This ultimately kind of becomes the anchor for the drawing. Everything is kind of being built off of that. Let's see, Jean is saying the chin is bigger in the drawing, so kind of right in. Yes, exactly. So hopefully that's the part I corrected. Again, that's another good way of putting it. Yeah, in Mad Moments Go, is using a mirror can correct things. That's a really good point. Ivan V, all right. I'm glad to hear that these videos are inspiring you. That's awesome. Carmen, I'm glad the instruction is useful to you. Let's go. The sound of the eraser sounds like the bird. That's awesome. I wish I had intended for that to happen, but all right. And yeah, exactly, Carmen just said all the comments from the peanut gallery are helpful. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. That's what drawing. That's when drawing gets really, really good, is when we kind of share our own experiences. This is really messing with my head right now, because I look at this, and because of the slope of the table, it looks one way, and I look up at the projection and from the camera, and it is totally different. Or at least, when I say totally, it being kind of aware of these minor differences. But all right, so I want to place. There's the gap in the beak. And I'm kind of, now again, building out this way. Okay, so if I have established now, say this side here, if I've established the general shape of that yellow part on the breast there, I'm going to go back and remeasure and use that as my guide for the width of the beak. So I'm going to take from the measurement from the top of the head to that point right there. So this measurement here is what I'm looking for. And I'm going to compare that to the length of the beak. So then if I'm taking this measurement here, on the reference photo, I'm turning it this way, and I'm putting this indicator on the tip of the beak, and I'm seeing how far back this end projects into the head. So I'm going to compare it to basically where does it align with the eye. So it's very similar to the measurements we took before, but slightly different. So I'm not kind of replaying the same incorrect thoughts as I had before. So I'm intentionally making some change to the measurement. So what I see when I use comparative measuring is that this height here, this distance here, if I take that same distance and I measure from the tip of the beak across to the left here, it puts me just to the left of the eye. So right about this point. So that means that the tip of the beak would actually kind of fall right in here. And that feels like it's really short. But perhaps I'm just gonna go with it. I'm gonna trust it. And now it's possible that it feels short because the height and width ratio are a little bit off. So the length of the beak is slightly more than 2 times the length of the height, I guess. So we take the height, we turn it this way, and the width is about like just slightly more than 2 of those units. So I do think that needs to come down a little bit. It needs to become a little bit slimmer. If I come up here. So instead of drawing that as a dark line, I'm going to draw it as a light line and see if that helps. We're kind of exploring some relatively new ideas here, I guess, in this show. When we're at 97 episodes, and it can start to feel a little redundant sometimes, I suppose. But that's what, every drawing is another opportunity to learn something new. New about yourself, new about the drawing, about the subject. Now that is wildly inaccurate. So I'm going to now cut back in and adjust, and I'm kind of anchoring from this point here, and then I'm going to build up. This is again where I need to use the view from the camera to make my decisions, because when I look at it from this angle, it feels like everything's tilting this way. And so when I look at it vertically, it's a different impression. Okay, so now if I take this measurement, let's see, what's about, do one. And so that puts the beak here. So as I want to be careful when I'm working with these marks here to still be thinking about value relationships, not line. Okay, so now what I want to do is, there's kind of a high point to the beak that I want to make sure I place properly. And so as I kind of draw that line, I'm kind of feathering it up. That pun was not intended, but I recognized it very quickly. And to just kind of, again, kind of keep my emphasis on value relationships versus line. So trying to intentionally being really gentle with these marks. Because what can happen is if I, in the background, if I start going like this and paralleling the shape of that beak, it's going to take that background, it's going to pop it forward. Your brain is going to look at it and say, hey, if they're both running in the same direction, they must belong together. So then that background, your brain's going to say, hey, that belongs with the shape of the beak because they look the same. They have the same shape. And so if you want to push it back, you need the marks in the background to run at an angle that's contrary to that curve. And that creates some visual separation there. So just be kind of mindful of that. And I'm going to do some drawing with the eraser, kind of establish that top edge of the beak, because I'm fairly confident now in the basic dimensions. And just kind of lifting here. So we're reestablishing that fundamental relationship and value between the light beak and, well, it's dark here in the photo against a dark background. I'm going to kind of visualize that. I think it's going to make for a stronger drawing to have it be a little bit darker back in here. But I don't want that to be too dark, because in the beak we're going to shift then where this is lighter than the background. We're going to come down here where this is in shadow, and that's going to be darker than the background. Adele is saying the base of that black vertical line is in plumb line with the upper curve of the neck. Ah, like right in here? Yeah. I agree. Good observations, Adele. Heather is saying, well, I know I have the toucan's body more straight in line with the paper and not angled like it should be. Oh, thank you for pointing that out and sharing that. There's a general axis to the bird that is really kind of important, and I've had that running through mentally, but I keep getting distracted and talking about it. So, sometimes people will start by establishing a general axis to get that tilt correct of the bird, or sometimes you just have it kind of running in your head, and that's kind of what I've been doing. I've been kind of mentally kind of processing that, but it can be good to kind of check that general axis. And it's hard to really kind of lock that in, but if you use your pencil to align with the overall angle of that bird and compare it to the reference photo, it can be helpful to get that kind of that tilt forward. Yeah. All right, thank you for the comments, Cynthia. Excellent. Okay, back to the drawing. Where are we at? We're about an hour in, so we have about an hour left of this. I think we'll probably be done before then. I think what I want to do is I don't want to finish the beak a bit too early. It's this line here that now is really messing me up. So if I compare the drawing to the photo, this top curve feels all right. Something seems really off in here. So I need to become a bit more sensitive. I have it kind of as this general curve, and it's really more of a straight line that comes across. And so this is a point where, in the process of thinking from kind of big general shapes to more specific, sometimes you have to pull back and go back to those big general shapes, right? And that's I had kind of lost sight of the fact that as a whole, there's really a strong horizontal quality to it, and then it kind of ticks over at the end. And then I'm going to start to, as I block in some of those values here, I'm kind of intentionally lifting up towards the top to help account for the curve, the rounded quality of the beak. I'm kind of working my way up to find that center crease there. All right, just giving myself a little bit more information on that, but I think I'm going to come back to the beak a little bit later, and then before I do that, I want to make kind of a general note about this curve here, that it kind of curves back at the end. Such a cool bird. It's a really awesome creature. Oh, and then Brenda is saying the bottom part of the black beak line curves a bit. It isn't so sharp. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think we're talking about in here. Yeah, that definitely needs to be refined a bit more. Thank you for that. Okay. Adele is saying, you could stop here and everyone know what it is. It's a good, thank you for bringing that up. Again, that's the a general mindset here is you try to bring everything up at once, and that puts you in control of how much detail you want. You know, so if your interest in a subject is really the abstract form and not the details, then you're good to go. You can kind of just stay focused on this and really dial in those proportions. You know, I feel like I'm at the point where I want to kind of get into some of the details, so I may have to accept a certain amount of inaccuracy with regards to you know, things like this beak. That's really messing me up. Here, just had a realization. As I'm looking at this, what's happening when I look at the paper in front of me in life, not the camera in front of me, I'm seeing this line out of my periphery, and I have this desire to make this horizontal. So what happens is that it makes this feel like it's curving down, right? In a really weird way. And so it's almost like mentally I'm framing the work like this, which is throwing everything off. So what I'm going to do now to help with that is to shift my thinking. So instead of just focusing on this angle here, I'm going to be intentionally focusing on the difference between this angle and this in the reference photo. And so I think that's going to help me with get this overall, because I still feel like this, I'm not quite getting it right, and I'm struggling between seeing it here and on the camera. And I think that's what it is. So just sometimes just being aware of that, like this element in here was throwing me off. That hopefully will help. Because right now when I'm drawing, I feel like I'm drawing lines down because I'm orienting myself to this as a horizontal kind of edge of the paper. So I need to adjust that a little bit. So, all right. That feels a little bit better. Whew. Taryn, welcome. It's good to see you. Awesome. Familiar name here. I hope all is well. out there in Texas. All right. I feel like I'm kind of mentally exhausted working on the beak, so I'm going to shift to working on something else that requires a little less thinking. I want to try to get the feet established in here, and this is where because we're running we haven't run long yet, but if I keep at this pace, it's going to take forever to get this thing done. I am going to try to make this part a little bit more gestural. So if you let your eyes lose focus and you're just kind of looking at it through blurred vision, taking in all the shapes as abstract forms, it may help you with this. Because when you start to think about the feet specifically and those little claws, they're really kind of weird, and it's really easy at this point to kind of project a less formed understanding of the shape of the feet. Like we just can start to make stuff up based on how it feels. And so I think if we don't identify with them as being feet, we just trust them as abstract forms, we can let the drawing just kind of come together. And so similar to the really other elements, think about it in terms of both positive and negative space. So as you're working on it, kind of put your awareness on this shape here that's formed on the outer edge of the feet, and that can be helpful as well. Because especially with things like feet, hands, when we're drawing people, we often default to the symbol system, those preconceived notions about how they should look, how they should be drawn. And one way to help break that is to squint your eyes and try to think about them as just abstract forms. And this is, when we've talked about it before, and this is one of the tricks from drawing on the right side of the brain, is to flip the reference photo upside down. You're really trying to change the context of the element so that you see it in a new way. So using the blending stump when I need to, and be mindful when you're using the blending stump of the direction of your mark, so similar to what we were talking about earlier. So as I drop that line in here, if that dark mark is the background, I actually should be doing this. I should be running this vertically to contrast against that angled slope of that branch. So that way visually, if we're able to see the marks, these hatch marks that we're putting in, we want that to create a visual separation between the background and that foreground element. Let's see, and so I'm dropping the value here kind of on purpose so that I can lift up some of the value here and kind of create some of that rounded quality of that branch. Carmen, I appreciate the comments that the drawing is looking more beautiful than the reference, better than the reference. Awesome, thank you. That can sometimes happen. There is something to the just mark making that we respond to, and it's perfectly acceptable just to kind of say, hey, I love some of these marks, even though they don't describe something particularly well. That's just what's awesome about drawing, is sometimes things just come together. All right, so just being careful here. So we were talking about kind of feathering out some of the marks around the edges before. That can be true when you're working both additively and subtractively. So as I lift up some of these marks around the edges, I want to feather those out a little bit so that it doesn't become a white line around there that's kind of haloing the form. But I can kind of refine this. And I don't know if I really care all that much about this background being smooth. But if you do want your background to be smooth, then what can be helpful is to kind of target the light areas. So for example, I feel like right in here it gets a little bit harsh. So what I'll do is I'll just come to the right of that, and it's really just the weight of the pencil, and I'm starting to fill in some of those white areas and then kind of feather it out, and that smooths the transition. And you can use a paper towel to kind of blend together and then redefine that edge. And now, like if there's a blotch like in here that's a bit too strong, you can also target it with your kneaded eraser, just kind of tap it out, blend it together, and keep tapping. Like I said, I don't know as if I care all that much about there being a kind of a blotchy surface, because it kind of adds some visual interest there. This does bother me though, like these curves here that so closely parallel the slope of that bird. So I'm going to change that up. Kind of lift off some of that there. And I kind of like that transition in value from dark to light, but it's a bit harsh right now, so I'm going to soften that a little bit more. That's just using the weight of the pencil. And so as I do that, here is along that edge, I'm intentionally dragging down to find that edge rather than go like this to sharpen up that edge, because again, I don't want to create a light halo around it. All right. Now, as I start to think about value relationships, I'm using the 2B, which is harder and a little bit lighter in value. And I know I'm kind of saving the 4B for later when I need the darkest darks. So if you're looking at this black shape, you can start to really just identify it as a flat shape, and then we'll bring a little bit more dimension later. And mostly what I'm looking at now, though, is creating some variation along that edge. So breaking up that edge as much as possible, because if it's a hard, consistent line, it's going to really be flat, and it's going to work against any sort of dimension that we want to create later. So let's, I have like a kind of a sharper edge here, softer up here, and I'm using just some subtle indicators from the reference photo about where I might be able to let some of those edges be softer, where they need to be sharper. Like right in here, for example, I want that to be sharp, but I can let it be a little bit soft down in there. Those lost and found edges can be really helpful sometimes, and creating edge variation is one of the keys. If your goal is to create something that is kind of more realistic looking versus kind of graphic, then you want to play around with those edges. At the same time, like I said, if your goal is to make something that's more graphic, then you end up kind of sharpening up those edges intentionally for for stylistic reasons. All right, so I think I'm going to do that with down here as well. I'm going to block it in as a solid shape, and then I'm going to separate that later with the 4B pencil. That's a little bit darker. And I'm going to intentionally leave some of these areas unfinished because just visually it seems kind of interesting to me to do that. So as I'm working on the branch here, now I'm starting to think about the dimension of the wood. So really kind of thinking about it as a three-dimensional form. And what that is going to require is kind of an observation of the direction of the marks. So using the side of the pencil, I'm thinking about the cross contour. It's not a very clear line. So what a cross contour is are marks that indicate the volume of the form. They're inside the contour, so inside the outer edges, whatever marks you use to suggest that form. So that's what I'm kind of thinking about here, and trying to be subtle with it, because I don't want to create these strong stripes. But as I'm working from top to bottom, if I can kind of have the dimension of the wood in my mind, it can sometimes then help me to create marks that reinforce the volume of the wood. So I enjoy using the side of the pencil because it also creates some kind of more natural looking marks. Something happens when we switch to this tripod grip and we make a distinct line. It indicates to the viewer that you're drawing the edge of something. And especially if we're working with a texture and trying to create the volume of this wood, we don't want a line that says, oh, this stops now. Now we're dealing with two separate objects. And so I think there's something about the quality of an overhand mark like this that feels more naturally formed. And you can kind of get away with a little bit more, and you can start to suggest texture. And so that's why I kind of use that more. And I really only switch to that tripod grip when I need a really fine detail and to define a specific edge. And so in this case, as I'm working with the texture of the wood, I'm thinking about two dimensions as I'm creating my marks. There's a dimension that runs the length of the branch, and then there's the dimension that wraps around the cross contour. So I'm running my marks this way to account for that lateral dimension, but then also bringing it down along that cross contour to hopefully suggest the three-dimensional quality of that branch. And then you want to vary those marks so that it doesn't feel like you're just creating these stripes down there. Actually switch to the blending stump. So I love working with texture because this is when you can really just have fun making marks and discover something new in the mark making. So with the blending stump, it's the same technique as when I'm working with the charcoal pencil. I really think about it as being another pencil. It's loaded with charcoal, so you can make these marks. It's just a different, quality of value. And so, if you're new to working with a blending stump, just keep in mind that it's whatever tool you're using, if it's a piece of charcoal, if it's a blending stump, it's the eraser, you're always contributing to the form. Sometimes we hold that in our minds that, a blending stump is for smoothing, an eraser is for correcting, and, charcoal is for mark making. But really, they're all contributing to the form. They're all mark making tools. And so as I'm doing that, I'm kind of rolling the blending stump in my fingers, and that allows me to kind of move to another area of the blending stump that has more charcoal loaded onto it. As you get comfortable using it, you'll kind of know intuitively where the charcoal is deposited on the blending stump, and you can use it for mark making or for blending. And if you kind of roll it in your fingers, you'll get a more even distribution of that charcoal. I think I want to come in here now and account for a little bit more texture using the eraser. Now, I'm not being super precise with this, making the drawing match the reference photo one-to-one. I don't have enough time, and honestly, it makes me claustrophobic to think about doing that. So I don't. There are just some areas I can only handle so much detail before it feels uncomfortable for me. But that's what's cool about drawing, is that everybody kind of has a different set point for that. Some of you may want to have more detail and be more precise with a one-to-one relationship between the drawing and the reference, and some of you may just want to embrace the abstract kind of quality of the materials. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So as I'm working with the eraser, I am thinking about pressure. I'm trying to think about a transition around for that wood from light to dark. And so I'll start with a light pressure, and if I need to lift off more, then you can kind of lean in on it, give it a little shake, and that'll start to lift off more of the charcoal. And then thinking just very quickly and generally making observations about the quality of the marks. So with texture, I'm trying to, when I look at the reference photo, just ask myself, is that a big shape? Is it a small shape? Is it more of a square? Is it more linear? And then try to create marks that react to that. So if I move over here, for example, where the bare wood is exposed, it feels kind of more like a series of fine lines. So I'll make more of those fine lines. As I come over here, it's a little bit chunkier, and you get these bigger blocks of the bark kind of peeling off. And so trying to just change up the marks, and that variety in the mark making is really what's going to make this feel more realistic. Is if I create a consistent set of marks that I move across the drawing, it will flatten things out and feel kind of artificial. And so now just kind of doing some negative drawing here and drawing that background, but using it to refine the shape of the branch and the tail. And I think for the tail, I don't want to get too much more detailed than I am right now, as long as it doesn't feel distracting. And then drop down the tone. It's just way too bright down in here. All right, so I want to come back up here, make sure I'm not missing any questions. Jessica is saying, seems that the feet claws need to be a little larger. That could definitely be true. Let me look into that. Thank you. Sue is saying there are curves to the beak, convex near the body and concave near the tip, like a gentle S. Yes, that's a good observation. So what, if I'm understanding correctly, and I can describe it the way I see it as well, is that as we look here, this becomes concave. It's kind of pushing into the form. As we come down here, there's a slight convex quality. It starts to kind of bulge out a little bit. And this is where there's a kind of an interlocking of those two. So you have a convex kind of transitioning into a concave. And then there's a stretch right in here where as a whole you have a concave form, but if you were to break that curve down, there might actually be convex elements within that concave form. So that's what makes it fun. Figure drawing is really important. So next week we're actually going to be drawing a dancer, so we can focus on kind of more figurative work, and that's going to be a key element in there. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Liz, looks like we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be, I don't know, we still got a half hour or more. We'll finish this thing up. All right, I'm glad everything's working out okay. Mad Moments Go, finish the mountain drawing. Awesome. Oh, and then Carmen, you had a question about where to share your drawing. So in the description below, you'll find a link to the show page on artistnetwork.com, and you can share that there. So if you go to artistnetwork.com, in the video section, you'll see Drawing Together. You click on that, and it'll take you to all the other episodes, and you can find this particular episode in that page will allow you to do it. And also I've pinned a message at the top of the chat, and that has that same link. So, all right, back at it. So we've got just a kind of a general value for the bird. I'm going to refine that. I'm feeling more confident about the scale of this foot than this one. So I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. I'm trying to sneak up on that a bit. And so I'm finding that sometimes drawing these details is a little bit easier to achieve with the blending stump than with the charcoal. It's a little bit softer of a mark. What I'm thinking about is really just the shape of the light and the shadow. And trying to trust those observations about the shape of the light and the shadow. And hopefully it reads as a foot. And I feel that's a little bit better. At least hopefully it's not distractingly small like I think it was before. Okay, moving back onto this. I'm going to move my way back up the drawing. Now what I want to observe are the variations in value here in this yellow part. Boy, that was wicked harsh right there. So just using the side of the blending stump to try to fill in some of these values, and some of them, they're really coming off strong right now. But like I said, I feel like when I'm working with the blending stump, it helps to avoid too much separation. You know, so that it creates marks that that hold to the form a little bit better. And what I want to try to observe is that transition from light into shadow, and recognize that we start to move into shadow here, and then into shadow and that dark. So we have that contrast in the colors, but I'm trying to unify them by light and shadow areas at this point. So a lot of those marks are really too heavy. So I'm going to come back in, tap with the kneaded eraser, keeping it really light. I don't want to lose those marks altogether. I just want to lighten them. And the kneaded eraser doesn't give me a whole lot of pressure, so I'm not lifting a lot of material. So that's one of the reasons I'm using it right now. Creating a soft transition here. If that edge becomes too hard, then we're going to see those as two separate shapes rather than a variation in color of the same form. You know, it's all the same form on the bird, but it's just changing color. And this is where I think I need to switch to this. I may need to sharpen it again. This is where it can be helpful to observe the subtle change in direction of these the feathers. And so, if I look here, for example, they're moving this direction. They're kind of bursting out from this this corner in the beak. And then they kind of wrap around. And as I come down here, I'm kind of lifting, so I'm putting a little bit more pressure on this area here, lifting up as I go to kind of soften that transition. Actually, I'll switch to this Tombow Mono Zero eraser that I have kind of sharpened down. Now, I don't feel like this lifts quite as much material as the Derwent eraser does, but but it's going to work really well for this. It's got a kind of a fine mark to it. That's what I'm looking for. Now, one of the things to also observe as we start to build the structure around the eye, you can see that change in form. They're not just kind of dark stripes on there. There's actually a three-dimensional quality. The eye is a sphere, and you can see in the shape of the eye around it a spherical form, almost like a crater in which the eye sits. And so I'm trying to be mindful of that. And then, I recognize that we've kind of lost this edge here, and that's all right, because I'm going to actually reestablish that with a 4B pencil a little bit later. So I'm just using this to kind of give myself a little bit more texture more than anything. You see, it's not lifting a whole lot, but hopefully it's kind of refining those marks a little bit more so that it feels more like feathers. Okay, so I'm not lifting much there. That lifts a bit more. So the light is strongest right here. And now to sharpen up that edge, I'm going to kind of darken this background, but I'm going to start back here just with some soft circular marks so that they're omnidirectional. Because I don't want to create this dark kind of halo leading up to that edge. So as I'm going to fill in some values here, I'm going to work my way up, and I can just gradually roll the pencil to achieve a fine tip. And I want to figure out where I want it to be kind of sharper, because I kind of like this kind of lost edge here, but I want it to be a little bit harder and sharper right in here. And I'm trying to be careful not to create a hard line, because that's what's going to flatten things out. I want the viewer to kind of understand this as a three-dimensional object. And if I give it a strong contour line, it may not quite have that. Now, contour lines can be used effectively without any loss of the dimension, but I need to kind of sneak up on it. All right, so, and as we develop kind of gradations in that background, we can start to be sensitive to how we interpret them as we look at it. Does it feel like just this dark blotch that's distracting, or does it feel like it fits naturally in that background? And just as we talked about there being a difference in how we interpret the proportions and the perspective when we switch, we flip the drawing vertically. The same thing can happen with regards to the contrast because of the way the light reflects off of the paper. And so the camera is kind of picking things up a little bit differently because the relationship between the studio light I have in front of me and here, when it's bouncing off and hitting my eyes, I see the values as one way. When I see it out of the camera, there's a difference in the contrast. So, sometimes it's a higher contrast, sometimes it's lower. And just something to be mindful of. So same when you're painting, changing the lighting can really make a big difference. I paint a lot outdoors, so when you're painting and even in shadow, the sun can be intense, and you bring it inside, and it looks totally different. All these bright colors that I saw outdoors are now muted indoors, muted and dark. So I'm just kind of feathering things out a little bit in that background. Pun well intended. Okay. And then I'm just refining this edge here. I'm going to come back in with a 2B and redefine that edge, but I want to make another observation. I don't want to trust the drawing. Just because the marks are there doesn't mean they're right. And so I'm using an overhand grip, kind of intentionally. It creates really nice fine lines. It also kind of sharpens the pencil, and it makes marks that just feel more naturally formed. So kind of passing the charcoal over to try to visualize the path, and then running them following the grain of the feathers to align with that edge. I think I need to, let me just block this in here. All right, let's see. Okay. Let's get that eye done. How about that? See how that works. So you can see I used the blending stump to kind of indicate that primary shadow underneath the eye. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to draw with a blending stump a bit more here. And then right in here, kind of refine the shape. It's really very circular. It's cool. And it feels a little odd because it's so circular. I'm used to, we're used to eyes that are more, kind of pinched in corners and such. But again, be thinking about light and shadow. I have this really fine blending stump, but it doesn't seem like I really need it. But you may find it useful to have a variety of blending stumps. Okay, so now I can draw in that eye, leaving a little bit of a gap. So there's this larger shadow, and then a fine shadow, and then a fine rim of light that catches on the inside edge of the innermost part of the eyelid. I think the scale is looking all right. So I think it's going to be close enough, I think, for me. So I'm just kind of sneaking up on those forms, kind of tapping in a few areas, kind of working my way around to find the specific shape of that eyeball. And then there's a highlight in here, again, that I want to kind of work around. So I'm just, again, tapping around it rather than drawing a hard line, and that'll feel a bit more natural when you do that. How's that read? I guess that works out all right. Seems a little bit small, but I don't want to mess with it right now, so we're stuck with it. All right. Oh, mad moments ago, you did a toucan painting about 22 years ago. That's awesome. I look forward to seeing that. So he is blind. That would be awesome if I was blind. That would be fantastic. All right. So now I'm just kind of refining this shape in along in here. Now, as you're starting to refine the details, I would encourage you to kind of put more emphasis on the inner portion of the form. Let those outer edges be soft for now. kind of work from the inside of the form out until you find that nice balance in terms of dimension. So I think if this becomes a focal point, you can see I switched to this tripod grip that gives me a little bit more control. And now I can really kind of refine and dial in the forms here, because that black stripe isn't a perfectly even and consistent black stripe. There's all these, you know, subtle nuances to the form, as has been observed by so many of you. So. As we come in under here, I love how that black, this is where that observation, I think that was Yusu that was talking about the relationship between the concave and the convex. So we see that in that black stripe as we come out, and then it kind of tucks in underneath, and then that becomes the convex form of that beak. And now, let's see, what am I doing now? Okay, so there are some subtle variations along that bottom edge that I want to be mindful of. And so instead of carrying a line all the way across, what I want to do is switch to, I want to put more emphasis on the beak, and then we're going to tie those together, so the very tip of the beak here. Now I know that I have a bit a greater tonal range available to me when I switch to the 4B. So I'm thinking about this dark red here as more of a solid value, and it becomes a little translucent at the tip, so a little bit lighter there. And I'm going to work back and forth from the center of the form out to the edge and back, just like I did here in that background. And you know, with these kind of circular marks in here to create some omnidirectional marks. So starting with kind of a fairly light pressure and then building into it in order to darken. So in that way I want to kind of block in that value, because when you look at the reference photo, you first see that tip of the beak as being this dark red, and then as you study it, all of these subtle variations emerge. And we want the viewer to process this drawing in that same way, kind of absorb that in as a solid value, and then get into the drawing with those subtleties. And one of the reasons I'm kind of stating that is really for my own benefit, because I often get so absorbed in observing those subtleties that I then overstate them in the drawing. And so I kind of have to remind myself a little bit to do that. So let's see, I want to sharpen this line here. So using that mono 0 eraser, we're going to come down here and let it feather out towards the base. And I might need to kind of darken this in here background a little bit and come up along that tip. And this is where actually a fine line might do it. So let me see how that works. I want to be able to sharpen that edge without it really feeling like a heavy line. Ariel's saying, I love blending stumps. I use them like a pencil once you have them loaded up. Exactly, yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I rejected blending stumps for the longest time because I had I think the wrong approach, at least the wrong approach for me, and I didn't see the potential for them as mark-making tools. And then when it was a shift in thinking about it, and I saw that, oh my God, these marks are really unique, and it totally changed, and I can't imagine drawing without it. So I'm actually going to use it here to kind of create these kind of triangular variations here, these unique kind of forms. on that beak. And I'm kind of leaving the gap in the beak a little bit ambiguous right now because I haven't quite placed it in my mind. So kind of working up to the edge here. Now generally this falls in shadow, but you can see there's a variation, a little bit more light striking here, kind of falls into shadow, and then there's a really kind of a darker path in the values here, but a little bit of reflected light along that bottom edge, I think. So again, we're just trying to keep it subtle here, blocking in major values, and that can always darken in certain areas if I need to. Now the question is that little orange patch on here, it's really hard to determine whether it's lighter or darker than the green around it. I feel like it's a little bit darker. All right, so how's everybody doing? How are your drawings? Are they coming together? Anybody stuck? Yeah, and yeah, Mad Moments Go said at the beginning this should be an easy one. It turned out the challenging. You never know how a drawing will go. Yes, I thought this was going to be actually a little bit easier, and it's kicked my butt, but that's what makes drawing fun. I love that experience of feeling like the whole drawing is just going to fall apart. And you kind of fight for it and it comes together. And I never quite have the confidence that a drawing will really turn out. You know, I think for me at least, I have the confidence to know that I can come up with something that's average, and that's about it. And then there's a lot of times it's just like I just doubt whether or not it's going to come together at all. All right, so just all right. So what do I need to do here? I need to kind of refine this line and along in here where it gets a little bit darker underneath that edge. And then you get this cool kind of jagged quality to the beak. And I'm going to come back in and darken in some of these areas to provide a little bit more variation at the tip of the beak here. I don't think I quite nailed that line, but I think I'm just going to let it be. And that'll inspire me to want to do this again and maybe try to get it right the next time. Because, I don't know, the idea of making a drawing that there's nothing to improve on terrifies me, so. All right, so let me switch to the 4B, a little bit darker. And this is where I'm going to bring in a little bit more depth to the tone. Not right up to the edge, but kind of just set inside. And as I work over here in the feathers then, see if there's any indication of where I can darken. I'm not going to darken right up next to the edge. If anything, I want to bring those darkest darks in a little bit just to help create some more of that rounded quality. That got a little too close to the edge there for me. Just underneath this feather here. So hopefully just, yeah, expanding that tonal range just enough that I can give a little bit more volume to this bird. Now the reference photo is so dark, I lightened it a bit in Photoshop to see if I could discover anything about the form that's being lost in the dark of the bird, but I still can't see it very well. A little bit of bounce light coming in here. And kind of lift off a little bit with my fingers. And kind of darken, kind of feather up next to it, and then darken it again as it tucks in under that wing. So I'm kind of exaggerating that a little bit. But so I'm going to try to find that balance between it being too exaggerated and then just enough there. So giving a little bit more definition. So now that dark form that was merged between the shadow on the claw and then that dark feathers, and now there's a little bit of separation by going a little bit darker in that feather, in the feathers over there. So I can tuck this in a little bit, but really going dark. Now the same can be said for separating the tail feathers from the branch. I'm going to go dark with these. See how that works. Yeah, create a little bit of separation there, and then maybe come in a little bit darker right in here. So get a little bit of bounce light there to help to create some separation. All right, what do I need to do? I'm going to come up here, switch back to the 2B, and I want this to be a little bit sharper in some areas. And I think there's I've lost some of the graceful curves along that back of the head. So I'm just going to try to establish those a little bit. It kind of flattens out here, and then we get these kind of, again, graceful curves there. Makes a wonderful noise. I apologize for that. All right. So, but I think we're pretty much done. I don't know as if I can do much more to this. It's going to make it substantially better. So we'll, I think I'll kind of wait a little bit, see if anybody has any questions, comments, observations, anything like that. Again, next week we're going to be episode 98 with a dancer. We're going to work on some figurative work and do some kind of gestural drawing, really try to capture the movement and expression of the figure, something that we haven't really done much at all in this series. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I haven't decided whether it's going to be in graphite or charcoal. So that'll be something. So again, we meet every 3 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday to draw together. So I want to thank you all for being here with me. I'm just going to check here. Oh, Cindy is saying it seems like the tonal values around the eye should be darker. Oh yeah, it's a good observation there. It's one of those things where they're a little bit darker in real life, but I look up at the overhead camera there, and they're really, really subtle. So maybe at least that one underneath, make that a little bit darker. And then this one up here is kind of a dominant mark. So thank you for that, Cindy. I'm glad you caught that before I signed off. Okay. I missed something here. Have you softened out the major dark body areas with the stump? I did do one pass with it early on, but not a whole lot. It's such a dark mass that wish I had a little bit more information in the reference photo. So I'm trying to see if I can really extract more from it, but let's see. Oh, Colleen is using chalk on gray tone paper. That's awesome. I look forward to seeing that. I thought about doing that for this one as well. I thought it'd be kind of cool to be able to start with a tone paper and bring out those lights. And so I don't think I have a very good reason why I didn't do that. I guess it just felt like working on charcoal. So I'm really glad you're working on the tone paper because I want to see how that looks. So let's see. All right, thank you everybody. Seeing some comments. I hope I didn't miss any questions. If there was a question or an observation that I didn't get to and you really want me to see it, let me please type that in now. I'm going to hang out for a little bit. I want to make sure that I caught everything because I think I missed some in there as I got absorbed in the drawing. So I'm trying to go back to see if I missed anything. So, but it doesn't look like it. But I'm not seeing anything more come in. Daniel is saying, please do next video in graphite. Yeah, I can do that. I think since we did charcoal this week, we did graphite and white charcoal the week before. So I think going back to graphite should totally work. So I think I'm going to give that a shot, and maybe on tone paper. I don't know. We'll see. Play around with it. But all right, it looks like all the questions and comments have come in, so I'm going to sign off. I'm going to see you all again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Have a fantastic week. I can't wait to see your Toucan drawings when you share them online when you go to artistnetwork.com. So thank you all. See you next week.